I was drinking my morning coffee when Gary's notification popped up on Facebook. He'd tagged me in a photo. My thumb hovered over the screen for maybe 10 seconds before I tapped it. The image loaded slowly, like my internet connection was giving me one last chance to look away. But I didn't. I saw her standing there, scissors in one hand, red ribbon stretched across the doorway. She was smiling that same bright smile I'd fallen for 6 months earlier. But the man next to her wasn't me. His hand rested on her lower back, possessive and comfortable. He was holding the other end of the scissors. They were cutting the ribbon together. The sign above them read Torres Realty Cebu in clean, modern letters. Not W.M. Homes like we'd planned. Not Warren and Maricela, just Torres. Congratulations to the happy couple on their new venture, Gary had written in the caption. Happy couple. I set my phone down and stared at the wall. The money I'd wired her 3 months ago was supposed to be for our business. The lease we discussed was supposed to have both our names. The dream she sold me was supposed to include me, but there she was, in a crisp white blazer, holding scissors with a man I'd never seen before. And I realized I'd been funding someone else's future while believing it was mine. The coffee went cold while I sat there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Trying to remember every conversation we'd had about the business. Trying to figure out how I'd gotten it so wrong. We're in this together, Warren. She'd said the night I sent the money. You're my partner. But partners don't get replaced at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Partners don't disappear from business signs. Partners don't find out they've been erased by scrolling through Facebook on a Tuesday morning. I picked up my phone again and studied the photo. The man beside her looked comfortable, natural, like he belonged there, like he'd always belonged there. And suddenly I understood something that made my chest feel hollow. I'd never been the partner. I'd been the investor. 3 months earlier, I was sitting on her condo balcony in La Hug, watching the lights of Cebu City stretch out below us. The night air was warm, and she was talking about her dreams. I've been working for other agents for 2 years, Maricela said, tucking her legs under her on the wicker chair. But I want something of my own. Something real. She had this way of talking with her hands when she got excited, gesturing toward the city like it was full of possibilities only she could see. The market here is growing so fast, Warren. Expats are buying property, locals are upgrading. There's so much opportunity. I loved listening to her talk about real estate. She knew every neighborhood, every price trend, every developer worth watching. She was smart, driven, and hungry for success in a way that reminded me of myself when I was younger. What's stopping you from starting your own agency? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in her glass. Capital, she said finally. And connections. I have clients who trust me, but I don't have the resources to go independent. No office space, no marketing budget, no cushion for the first few months. The way she said it wasn't desperate or manipulative. It was matter of fact, like she was explaining a logistics problem. And logistics problems were something I understood. What would it take? I found myself asking. Her eyes lit up. Maybe 6 months of operating expenses, a small office in a good location, professional signage, business cards, a website. Nothing fancy, just legitimate. She leaned forward, and her voice got softer. I've been thinking about calling it W.M. Homes, Warren and Maricela. What do you think? I felt something shift in my chest. I'd been retired for 8 months, rattling around my empty house in Oregon, wondering what to do with the rest of my life. The pension was more than enough to live on, but I missed having a purpose, missed building something. W.M. Homes, I repeated. I liked the sound of that. She reached over and took my hand. We could be real partners, Warren. 50-50. I bring the local knowledge and client relationships. You bring the business experience and startup capital. It sounded perfect. Too perfect, maybe, but I didn't want to think about that. I wanted to think about having a reason to wake up in the morning again. About being part of something growing and alive. How much are we talking about? I asked. 22,000 US, maybe 25, enough to get started properly. She squeezed my hand. But only if you believe in it, only if you believe in us. I looked out at the city lights twinkling below, then back at her face. She was watching me with hope and excitement, like I held the key to everything she'd ever wanted. We'll build something real, I said, and I meant it. 2 weeks later, She called me at 7 in the morning, breathless with excitement. "Warren, I found it. The perfect space." I was still in bed, but her energy was infectious. "Tell me about it." "It's on Ramos Street, near the IT park. Ground floor, big windows, parking in back. The landlord wants to rent it today, but I need to move fast. There are 3 other people interested." I sat up, fully awake now. "How fast?" "I need to put down first and last month's rent plus security deposit by this afternoon. That's 1.2 million pesos. I did the math in my head. About 22,000 US dollars, the exact amount we'd discussed. Can you send me photos?" "Of course. But Warren," her voice got softer, "I don't have that kind of money sitting in my account. If we're going to do this, I need your help now." Something in my gut twisted. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I'd never moved that much money that quickly before. "What if we lose it?" I asked. "What if something goes wrong with the transfer?" "Then we try again with the next space." "But Warren, this one is perfect. I can already see our sign in the window." Her confidence was reassuring. She'd been doing real estate for years. She knew the market. She knew what made a good location. And the business plan made sense. We'd gone over the numbers 3 times. "Okay," I said. "I'll call the bank when they open." The wire transfer took 6 hours to process. I spent most of that time pacing around my kitchen, checking my phone every 10 minutes for updates. When the confirmation finally came through, I called her immediately. She started crying as soon as she heard my voice. "I got it," she whispered. "The money came through. I got the space." That evening, we celebrated at a Korean BBQ place in La Hague. She kept reaching across the table to touch my arm, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "I've never had a real partner before," she said over grilled pork belly and soju. "Someone who believes in me enough to take a risk." "It's not just a risk," I told her. "It's an investment. In the business. In us." She raised her glass. "To WM Homes. To building something real." We clinked glasses, and she smiled that brilliant smile that made everything seem possible. Later, walking back to her condo, she slipped her arm through mine. "I'll never forget this, Warren. What you did today. We're in this together now." And I believed her completely. 3 weeks passed before I started asking questions. "When can I see the office?" I asked over dinner at a seafood place near the pier. Maricela was picking at her grilled fish, distracted by something on her phone. "It's still under construction," she said without looking up. "The landlord is installing new flooring and fixing the air conditioning. Maybe next week." The week after that, it was electrical problems. The week after that, it was internet installation delays. Every time I brought it up, there was a reasonable explanation for why I couldn't visit yet. But the explanations were starting to feel rehearsed. I could help with the setup. I offered one evening as we walked along the Cebu IT park. "I've got experience with office layouts from the military. Project management, vendor coordination." She shook her head quickly. "You don't understand how things work here, Warren. Everything has to be done through local connections. If they see I'm working with a foreigner, it raises questions about permits and taxes. It's better if I handle it myself for now." That stung, but she said it so matter-of-factly that I swallowed my hurt feelings. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being too eager, too American about wanting to see immediate progress. "What about clients?" I asked. "How are the first few weeks going?" "Good," she said, but didn't elaborate. "Lots of interest. I'm meeting with prospects almost every day." When I asked for specifics, she'd change the subject or get a phone call that required her immediate attention. I started noticing the phone calls happened a lot when I asked about business details. I also started noticing she was away more often. Client meeting. She'd text at the last minute when we had plans. Site visit with potential buyers. Market research in Mandaue. I understood that real estate required long hours and flexible schedules. I'd run logistics operations that demanded the same kind of availability. But something felt different. When she was with me, she seemed distant, distracted, like her mind was always somewhere else. One evening, I suggested joining her for a client showing. "You could introduce me as your business partner," I said. "I'd love to see you in action." Her reaction was sharp and immediate. "No, Warren, absolutely not." When I asked why, she softened her tone but not her position. "Filipino clients are very traditional. If they see I'm romantically involved with my business partner, especially a foreign business partner. They'll assume I'm not serious. They'll think this is just a side project while I wait for my foreign boyfriend to take care of me. But we are business partners, I said. That's not a lie. It's complicated, she replied. Let me build up the client base first. Once I'm established, once they trust me, then maybe we can be more open about the partnership structure. I wanted to argue, but the way she said it made sense, sort of. So I stayed in the background and waited for her to get established. Waited for the office tour that never came. Waited for the client meetings she never described. Waited for the business updates that got shorter and vaguer each week. And slowly, I started to feel less like a partner and more like someone who was being managed. I was at BPI Metro to exchange some dollars when the teller, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, discreetly motioned for me to step aside. Sir, may I speak with you privately? My chest tightened immediately. In my experience, private conversations at banks were never good news. She led me to a small office behind the teller windows and closed the door. Sir, you made a large transfer several weeks ago. To Miss Dyson. I nodded, unsure where this was going. Yes, for a business investment. She looked uncomfortable, like she was breaking protocol by bringing this up. Sir, I noticed something when I processed the paperwork. The name on the receiving account was not Dyson. It was Dyson Torres. The room went cold. I'm sorry, what? The full name on the account was Maricela Dyson Torres, with a hyphen. I just wanted to make sure you knew who you were sending money to. My mouth felt dry. Are you sure? She nodded. The system requires full legal names for large transfers. Maricela Dyson Torres is her complete registered name. I thanked her and left the bank in a daze. Outside, I sat on a bench in the plaza and tried to process what I'd just learned. Torres. Her last name was Torres, or at least part of it was, and I'd never heard that name before. Not once in 3 months of dating. Not once in all our conversations about the business. That evening, I went through every email she'd ever sent me, every document we'd shared, every photo she'd posted on social media. I was looking for clues I might have missed. Signs that should have been obvious. In one email from 2 months earlier, she'd attached a scan of her business permit application. I'd glanced at it briefly when she sent it, just long enough to see it was official paperwork. But now I looked more carefully. At the top, in small print, was her full legal name, Maricela Santos Dyson Torres. Santos was apparently her middle name. Dyson was her maiden name. And Torres was her married name. I stared at that document for 20 minutes, like the letters might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. But they didn't. She was married. She'd been married the entire time we'd been together. Married when she told me about her dreams. Married when we planned WM homes. Married when I wired her my pension money. Married when she cried and said we were partners. I tried to find explanations that didn't involve deliberate deception. Maybe she was divorced but hadn't changed her name back yet. Maybe it was a business marriage for visa purposes. Maybe Torres was an ex-husband she'd forgotten to mention. But even as I invented these possibilities, I knew they were fantasies. The hyphenated name wasn't an oversight. It was her real name, her legal identity, and she'd hidden it from me completely. I waited until the next evening to confront her. We were supposed to have dinner at her place, but I couldn't eat. I sat on her couch while she moved around the kitchen, chatting about her day like nothing had changed. Maricela, I said finally, we need to talk. Something in my tone made her stop stirring whatever was on the stove. She turned to face me, and I saw a flicker of wariness in her eyes. What's wrong? Is your last name Torres? The question hung in the air between us. She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. It's complicated, she said finally. Complicated how? I kept my voice level, but my heart was hammering. Are you married? She set down the wooden spoon and crossed her arms. Warren, why are you asking me this? Because I just found out that the money I sent you went to someone named Maricela Dyson Torres. Because I just realized I don't even know your real name. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, flatter, less warm. Yes, technically I'm married, but it's not what you think. What is it then? We're separated, have been for over a year. We just haven't made it legal yet. I felt like I was falling. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. You'd assume the worst instead of listening to the whole story. What's the whole story? She moved to the window and looked out at the city lights. His name is Carlos. We got married young, too young. It didn't work out. We live completely separate lives now. I haven't even seen him in months. But you're still legally married. The paperwork doesn't mean anything, Warren. It's just bureaucracy. I wanted to believe her. Part of me was already trying to find ways to make her explanation work. But another part of me, the part that had run logistics operations and learned to spot problems before they became disasters, was asking different questions. Is he involved in your real estate work? No, she said quickly. Then, after a pause, not directly. What does not directly mean? She turned back to face me, and her expression was harder now. Less apologetic. Look, Warren, you helped me start something. You invested in my business. I never promised you anything beyond that. The words hit me like cold water. We talked about being partners. We talked about a lot of things. You said WM Homes, Warren and Maricela. That was an idea. Plans change. I stood up, feeling dizzy. So what is this? What are we? She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift behind her eyes, something that looked almost like pity. We're two people who had a nice time together, and now maybe we want different things. The casual way she said it was worse than anger would have been. Like our 3 months together, our plans, our partnership, had all been temporary entertainment. What about the money? What about it? You invested in a business. The business is doing well. You should be happy. But it's not our business. It's yours. And apparently your husband's. Carlos is helping with some of the administrative stuff. It's easier that way. The business I funded is being run by your husband. She shrugged. You funded the startup costs. How I structure the operations is my decision. I walked toward the door, feeling like a stranger in a place I'd thought was becoming home. I trusted you, I said. And I appreciated that. But trust and ownership aren't the same thing, Warren. I never asked you to own me. The next morning, I took a taxi to Ramos Street. I needed to see the office for myself, to see what $22,000 had built. The driver dropped me off in front of a modern 3-story building with ground-floor retail spaces. I walked along the sidewalk, checking addresses until I found the right unit. The sign was elegant and professional. Torres Realty Cebu, in black letters, on a white background. Below that, in smaller font, your trusted property partner. There was no mention of WM Homes, no mention of Warren, no mention of our partnership. Through the large windows, I could see the interior. Clean white walls, modern furniture, a reception desk with fresh flowers, 2 offices in the back with glass partitions. Professional and legitimate. Exactly what we'd planned. Except it wasn't we anymore. It was she and he. I watched from across the street as people moved around inside. Maricela was at a desk with clients, a young couple looking at property brochures. She was animated and professional, exactly the skilled agent I'd fallen for. At the back of the office, a man was organizing files. He was tall, well-dressed, probably in his early 30s. He moved through the space with familiarity, like he belonged there. Like it was his place too. Carlos, I assumed, her husband, the man who was helping with administrative stuff, the man whose last name was on the sign. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes, watching the business I'd funded operate without any trace of my existence. Clients came and went. Phone calls were answered. Deals were discussed. The whole enterprise was functioning exactly as we'd envisioned, just without me in the picture. When Maricela walked toward the front window to show her clients something on the street, she looked right at me. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. She didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't look surprised or guilty or anything at all. She just looked at me for a few seconds, then turned back to her clients as if I were a stranger passing by, which, apparently, I was. I walked back to the main road and caught a jeepney toward La Hug. As the city rolled past the windows, I tried to piece together what had actually happened. I'd met a woman who was married but called herself single. I'd fallen for her dreams, which turned out to be her and her husband's dreams. I'd funded a business partnership that was never really a partnership. I'd believed in something that had never existed, at least not in the way I understood it. The worst part wasn't the money, though $22,000 wasn't nothing. The worst part was how completely I'd misread the situation, how thoroughly I'd been played, or how thoroughly I'd played myself. She'd never explicitly lied about being single. She'd just never mentioned being married. She'd never promised me ownership in writing. She'd just talked about partnerships in vague, hopeful terms. She'd never signed any contracts making me a legal partner. She'd just accepted my money and let me believe what I wanted to believe. And now, I was the man standing outside the window of a business he'd funded, watching other people live the dream he'd thought was his. I didn't call her that day, or the next. I spent the time walking around Cebu City, trying to figure out what I wanted to say, trying to figure out if there was anything left to say. On the third day, I sat in a coffee shop near the pier and wrote her a text message. I saw the office. It looks professional. I hope your business thrives. I stared at those words for a long time before adding, just know it came at a cost. I sent it and turned off my phone. I didn't want to see her response, if there was one. I didn't want to get pulled into another conversation where she'd explain why everything I was feeling was wrong or misguided. I was done trying to understand her logic, done trying to make sense of a situation that was never meant to make sense to me. The next morning, I booked a flight to Dumaguete. I'd heard it was quieter than Cebu, more relaxed, a better place for someone who needed to think. I packed everything I owned in the Philippines into 2 suitcases, which wasn't much. I'd been living light, planning to settle down once the business got established, once our life together got established. But there was no our life. There never had been. I left Cebu without saying goodbye to anyone except Gary, who'd tagged me in the photo that started this whole unraveling. Sorry, brother, he said when I told him I was leaving. I thought you knew about her situation. What did you know? I asked. Just that she was married. I figured you were cool with it, or that they were separated or something. I didn't think it was my business to get into the details. How long have you known? Since I met her. She introduced herself as Mrs. Torres when we first met at that expat mixer last year. Mrs. Torres. She'd been Mrs. Torres the entire time, even when she was planning WM homes with me, even when she was crying over Korean BBQ about finally having a real partner. The flight to Dumaguete was only 40 minutes, but it felt like traveling to a different world. Smaller, quieter, with less traffic and fewer expectations. I rented a small house near the beach, nothing fancy, just clean and peaceful. For the first week, I didn't do much except sit on the porch and watch the sea. I thought about calling her. About demanding explanations or apologies or some kind of closure. But what would be the point? She'd already shown me exactly who she was and what I'd meant to her. Everything else would just be noise. I deleted her number from my phone on a Tuesday morning, not out of anger but out of self-preservation. Some doors need to be closed completely before you can start looking for new ones to open. 6 months later, I still get the emails. Property listings from Lamudi, updates from Property, market reports from Filipino real estate sites. We'd signed up for them together when we were researching the business, back when market data felt like intelligence gathering for our shared future. I should unsubscribe, but I don't. Every few days, one lands in my inbox with subject lines like new condos in Cebu IT Park or investment opportunities in Metro Manila. I read them over coffee, scanning through listings for properties I'll never buy in cities where I no longer have reasons to invest. It's not masochistic exactly. It's more like staying connected to a version of myself that believed in something that turned out to be false, but wasn't entirely wrong for believing. This morning's email featured a spotlight on rising real estate entrepreneurs in Cebu. I almost deleted it without opening, but curiosity won. Halfway down the page was a photo of Maricela at a networking event, shaking hands with some city official. The caption read, Torres Realty continues to expand its client base and market presence in the greater Cebu area. She looked successful, happy. The business was thriving, apparently. Part of me was glad for that. Not glad that she'd succeeded by deceiving me, but glad that the money had gone toward something real rather than just disappearing into nothing. At least something good had come from my mistake. I've started looking at property again, but differently now. Not as someone trying to build a life with another person, but as someone trying to build a life for himself. There's a small resort for sale near Siquijor that's been tempting me. Not as an investment, exactly, but as a project. Something to renovate and improve and maybe eventually sell. Something that would be entirely mine, with my name on all the paperwork. Last week, I had coffee with an Australian expat who'd been living in Dumaguete for 5 years. He'd heard my story through the foreigner grapevine and wanted to offer some perspective. "You weren't the first," he said, "and you won't be the last. There's something about being foreign and lonely and having money that makes certain people see opportunity rather than human beings. Do you think she planned it from the beginning?" I asked. He shrugged. "Does it matter? The result was the same either way." He was right, but I still wonder sometimes. Were those late-night conversations on her balcony genuine or performance? When she cried after I sent the money, were those real tears or strategic tears? When she talked about building something real together, did she mean it in the moment, or was it always just a script? I'll probably never know, and I'm learning to be okay with that uncertainty. What I do know is that I wasn't looking for a profit when I wired her that money. I wasn't trying to buy a business or a woman or a future. I was looking for connection, for partnership, for someone who saw value in what I had to offer beyond just the dollars in my bank account. And that's what makes it hurt, even now. Not the financial loss, but the emotional con. The way she made me feel useful and needed and valued, right up until the moment I wasn't useful anymore. But I also know I'll invest again. Maybe not in another person's dream, but in something. The money was just money. The real loss was the trust. And trust is something you can choose to rebuild, even after it's been broken. Especially after it's been broken. I'm 53 years old, retired, healthy, with most of my life still ahead of me. I have enough money to live comfortably, and enough experience to avoid making the same mistake twice. And I have something else now that I didn't have 6 months ago. A clearer understanding of the difference between investing in someone and investing with someone. The next time I build something real, I'll make sure my name is on the sign from day one.